Thank you for all being so patient and waiting so long. It was a fairly complex task, and it's hardly surprising because it was so complex that we're finishing more than 2 hours after we'd expected to finish. But in any event, I am going to take you through the results of Ballot 4. It was Ballot 4B, but it's now Ballot 4. And I'm going to deal with each of the reasons sequentially. And the first reason is reason 1. And that reason was real and substantial physical risk to the life of the woman. The number of eligible voters were 88, the number of votes cast 88, invalid votes 1, and my understanding in relation to all of the invalid votes, we'd none up to now, but apparently there was no X marked opposite a particular reason, and that was the invalidity in relation to that particular reason. And then the total valid poll was accordingly is 87. Then just looking at the result, you'll notice that if you take B1, B2 and B3 together, the total vote is 82. Then if you break down B1, B2 and B3, the high line is B3 with no restriction as to gestational age, and that vote is 76%. In relation to the other votes, never for this reason, only 1, and up to 12 weeks gestation only, 8, that's 10%, and up to 22 weeks gestation only, 12 votes, that's 15%. And in relation to the prefer not to state an opinion, the total number of votes under that category was 4. So we'll move on to the next reason, which was reason 2, real and substantial risk to the life of the woman by suicide. The number of eligible voters, again 88, the number of votes cast 88, invalid votes 1, and total valid poll 87. And then as regards the votes, the B1, B2 and B3 categories totaled 79 votes, that's 95%. Again, the high line was with no restriction as to gestational age, and that's 48 votes or 61%. The other B categories up to 12 weeks, 9 votes, 11%, up to 22 weeks, 22 votes, 28%. Never for this reason, 4 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 4 votes. So then we'll move on to section 3. I take it you're all able to follow this? Yeah, thank you. Section 3. Again, the same number of eligible votes and votes cast, and the total valid poll, again this time, was 87 votes. And when we look at the result, the B categories aggregated 76 votes or 93%, and the highest number of votes in that category went to B3 with no restriction as to gestational age, and that was 43 votes or 57%. And then up to 22 weeks, 21 votes, 28%, up to 12 weeks, 12 votes, 16%. And then on the other categories, never for this reason, 6 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 5 votes this time. Moving on to reason 4, serious risk to the mental health of the woman. Again, the voting is similar, the eligibility and the votes cast, and the total valid poll was 87. Now, looking at the result, again, I look at categories B1, B2 and B3 in aggregate, and they achieved 74 votes or 90%. And the highest subcategory was B3 with no restriction. That was 35 votes or 47%. Up to 22 weeks, was 24 votes, 32%, up to 12 weeks, 15 votes, 20%, and the never for this reason, 8 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 5 votes. Then moving on to ballot 4, serious risk to, moving on to reason 5, serious risk to the health of the woman. No invalid vote this time, so the total vote was 88. The 3 B categories aggregated 77 votes, or 91%, and the breakdown of that was B3 was the highest vote with no restriction. That was 40 votes, or 52%. B2 up to 22 weeks, 25 votes, or 32%, and up to 12 weeks, 12 votes, or 16%. And then in the other categories, never for this reason, 8 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 3 votes. Reason 6, risk to the physical health of the woman. Like most of the votes, the total valid poll on the usual basis was 87 votes. Then the result, again looking at the B categories in aggregate, they aggregated 66 votes, or 79%, and the highest in that category was B3 with no restriction, 28 votes and 42%. Then up to 22 weeks, 26 votes, equivalent to 39%, and up to 12 weeks, 12 votes, 18%. On this ballot, never for this reason secured 18 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion secured 3 votes. Reason 7, risk to the mental health of the woman. Again, the eligible and cast votes are the same, and 1 invalid vote, so the total valid poll was 87. Now, in this category, or for this reason, I look at the B1 category first, and the 3 B subcategories aggregated 63 votes, or 78%, and the highest vote was for up to 22 weeks. You'll see that that was 31 votes, 49%, and then next, B3 with no restriction, 20 votes, equivalent to 32%, and then B1 up to 12 weeks, 12 votes, that is to say 19%, and never for this reason secured 18 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, secured 6 votes. Now, reason 8, risk to the health of the woman. Again, 87, the total valid poll was 87 votes, and that was on the same basis as the earlier reasons. And looking at the result, looking at the B category, in aggregate, the B categories secured 65 votes, or 78%, and the highest number of votes in the subcategories was for B2 up to 22 weeks, 30 votes and 46%. Then B3, no restriction, that was 25 votes, or 38%, and then up to 12 weeks, 10 votes and 15%. The never for this reason secured 18 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 4 votes. Then we come to reason 9, which is pregnancy as a result of rape. In this case, there were 86 total valid votes. The number of eligible votes, again, was 88, and the number cast was 88. There were 2 invalid votes, and the total valid poll, as I've said, came to 86 votes. Then when we look at the result, we look first of all at the B category, and the aggregate for B1, B2 and B3 was 73 votes, or 89%. Now, when we look at the breakdown, we see that there is an element of equality here, in that B2 that's up to 22 weeks, secured 25 votes or 34%. And similarly, B3, no restriction, secured 25 votes up to 34%. And then B1, up to 12 weeks, 23 votes and 32%. There were 9 votes, never for this reason, and the number of votes for prefer not to state an opinion was 4%. Now, because of the equality in this particular case, I have to exercise my casting vote, and I am going to exercise my casting vote in favour of B2 up to 22 weeks. So the total number of votes in that category now are, the total number is 26. The percentage will have to be worked out separately. So that's that vote. Then reason 10, the unborn child has a fetal abnormality that is likely to result in death before or shortly after birth. And again, the voting, the number of votes, number of eligible votes, and votes cast, invalid votes, just 1. So the total valid poll is 87. So that's the same as the count for the previous reasons. Now, when we look at the result of this vote, we see that looking at category B in the aggregate, we see that there were 77 votes for category B. That's equivalent to 89%. And the breakdown, the highest number of votes was for no restriction, 53 votes or 69%. Then 22, up to 22 weeks, 18 votes or 23%. And then up to 12 weeks, 6 votes or 8%. In relation to the other categories, never for this reason, 10 votes were secured. And then in relation to prefer not to state an option, there was no vote for this particular reason in that category. Reason 11, the unborn child has a significant fetal abnormality that is not likely to result in death before or shortly after birth. And in this case, there were 2 invalid votes, so the total valid poll was 86 votes. And in relation to the result, again, I look at categories B1, B2 and B3, and they aggregate 66 votes or 80%. And the breakdown, the highest number of votes was for B2 up to 22 weeks, 32 votes, 48%. And then no restriction, 25 votes, equivalent to 38%. And then 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks, 9 votes, that's to say 14%. And in relation to the other 2 categories, never for this reason, there were 17 votes cast for that. And then prefer not to state an opinion, 3 votes were cast. Then reason 12, which is socio-economic reasons, the total valid poll this time was 87 votes. There was only 1 invalid vote. And looking at the result, categories B1, B2 and B3 aggregate 60 votes, which is equivalent to 72%. And when you break that down, the highest vote was for up to 22 weeks. That was 30 votes or 50%. Then up to 12 weeks, 24 votes and 40%. And then with no restriction, 6 votes and 10%. And the other categories, never for this reason, 23 votes, and prefer not to state an opinion, 4 votes. Reason 13, which actually is the last reason, and this is the no restriction as to reasons. And the total number of votes in this category was 87. There was 1 invalid vote. And looking at the result, categories B1, B2 and B3 aggregated 52 votes or 64%. And the breakdown was as follows: up to 12 weeks, 25 votes or 48%, up to 22 weeks, 23 votes or 44%, and no restriction was 4 votes. That's equivalent to 8%. And the other categories, A, never for this reason, 29 votes, and C, prefer not to state an opinion, 6 votes. And finally, the question that was added on this afternoon, and the question was based on this statement: a distinction should not be drawn between the physical and mental health of the woman. And in relation to this, there were 88 valid votes. There was no invalid vote. And the response was that 60% of the voters, that is to say 72%, agreed with that statement. 23 voters, or 28%, disagreed with the statement, and 5 voters preferred not to state an option. So that is the result of all of the ballots. They remain up on. Yeah.
We'll get them up online as soon as possible.
Or they're not online yet?
Not yet. They're in the process of going up.
Very good, yeah. And are we giving hard copies?
Yeah, we'll have hard
We'll have hard copies available for the members as well shortly. And I just have, as they say, Oscailga, I have a few cúpla focal to say before we separate. Again, I regret that you were retained here for so long, but there was no way of avoiding it because of the complexity of the voting and the complexity of the counting. So I'll just proceed, as they say, with my cúpla focal. This weekend we've reached a conclusion of sorts, as you, the members, have fulfilled the first task that the Houses of the Oireachtas asked you, having comprehensively considered Article 40.3.3 as set out in the Constitution. You have made your recommendations known, and these recommendations, at a minimum, have called for a change to the status quo. I will now, for the purpose of absolute clarity and posterity, take the room through these recommendations. First of all, there's the results. In ballot 1, the members voted by a majority that Article 40.3.3 should not be retained in full. To be clear, to act on this initial recommendation, a constitutional referendum will be required. In ballot number 2, 56% of the members of the Assembly voted that 43.3.3 should be replaced or amended. And this result brought us to ballot 3. And in this vote, 57% of you recommended that Article 40.3.3 should be replaced with a constitutional provision explicitly authorising the Oireachtas to address termination of pregnancy, any rights of the unborn, and any rights of the pregnant woman. In other words, it would be a matter for the Oireachtas to decide how to legislate on these issues. This morning, you were asked to make recommendations by ballot to the Oireachtas about what should be included in the legislation. Specifically, what reasons, if any, what were the reasons, if any, for which termination of pregnancy should be lawful in Ireland, as well as any gestational limits that should apply. And I've just read out the results of that ballot, and I'd like at this stage to express the gratitude, my own gratitude and the gratitude of the Secretariat and the members to John Fitzpatrick and his team for the great job they did in advising us, first of all, and then on actually doing the counting of the vote. It has achieved absolute transparency for us and accuracy. The recommendations you've made certainly have called for a change to the status quo. And in fact, I think, and there'll be a lot of analysis of this, and I haven't done the analysis because I've only seen, like you, I've only seen the results, but I think they have provided a clear map for my report to the Houses of the Oireachtas. The Oireachtas members will certainly know, I think, what way this Assembly is recommending that legislation be enacted to deal with termination of pregnancy, any rights of the unborn, and any rights of the pregnant woman. Now, I've mentioned several times throughout this weekend about ancillary recommendations, and I'm going to mention them again because I think they are important. Further to these definitive balloted recommendations, you recollect that we asked you to provide earlier through the reflective written exercise certain recommendations. I know that I can be prone to repetition on the matter of how well informed you are as a group of people on this topic, and I make no apologies for that, as I have seen how hard you've worked throughout the process, and I remain convinced of the merits of capturing as much information from you as we can. Therefore, the consensus issues which come through the process will have a home in the report, and I believe they will be of benefit to those who will be tasked with considering the report, and indeed tasked with the very, very difficult job of legislation in this difficult area. And I hope you have furnished your recommendations. Have they been collected? Thank you very much. Now. There is obviously, there has emerged in this process some dissenting voices, and though I talk now of majorities and consensus, I wish to acknowledge that those whose perspectives or opinions did not emerge in the final vote we will have regard to them. This is an exercise in deliberative democracy, and your vote remains important because of the very fact it captures that other perspective, that dissenting voice, the different interpretation, and I wish to assure you that your votes and voices will be recorded and will have a valuable place in the report. Now, a few words about the process. And a short reflection on this weekend and how we reached the recommendations. Since we've come together on this topic, we, and I think probably this goes to you more than to me, have challenged experts, each other and indeed ourselves, to find answers to deeply complex questions. This weekend was not without its moments of tension and was often fraught with the pressure we all felt. I think this was an entirely reasonable response, and every sentence deserved to be parsed to the extent that it was. And I've come to expect nothing less from this forum than to be required to do so. I was heartened to see, and I mean this, how the spirit of collegiality ultimately prevailed. The atmosphere today was certainly much more benign than yesterday, and I'm grateful to the citizens for adopting that approach, because I do know this is very, very difficult for the vast majority of people who have to address these issues. And I want to say that your work alone has allowed so much new information into the public sphere, and your respect and willingness to listen to one another may have set a new tone. I want to thank those who have contributed to the Assembly. In the room every weekend, we have had an incredibly bright and enthusiastic team of facilitators and note takers. I think they may have departed, but in any event, I do want to record our appreciation to them. Their work involves a very special skill, and we benefited immensely from their presence. Also, the expert advisory group, who have also been an immense support to the Secretariat and to me throughout the process. I say I'm very grateful for all their work, and I mention immense support. Those words do not represent my real feeling about the expert advisory group. I think the epithet I used on previous occasions was invaluable. The work I got, and the assistance I got from the expert advisory group was really invaluable, and the amount of time and effort they put into assisting the Secretariat and assisting me, and sort of in the long term assisting the public was immense. I'm very, very grateful to them. I also want to thank those who helped. And before I leave the expert advisory group, we had great assistance from Dr. Adrian Foran today, and I'm very, very grateful. As I said this morning, I'm very grateful to her for, at short notice, assisting us. Again, the epithet that springs to mind is invaluable. Thank you very much, Adrian. I want to thank those who helped us to provide you with the information you needed to come to this weekend's recommendations. As I've said before, we were very fortunate to be able to withdraw from the more polarising perspectives and begin with the facts. I said that yesterday and I repeat it today. Over the course of this assembly, you heard from 25 experts across medical, ethical and legal fields, and I believe that their contributions provided us with a solid foundation to go forward. And if I may also say, I do believe that they should provide great assistance to the Oireachtas Committee and to whoever is dealing with the drafting of legislation in the fullness of time. I think they will derive great benefit from the papers that we got from the experts, and I'm very glad that we put that effort into obtaining all of this information. If any of you read the summary of what happened at the earlier meetings, you would probably, like me, have been, if I may use the word, gobsmacked when you looked back on the amount of material we got. The Secretariat did a fantastic job in procuring all of that information. It's there, it's on the website, and it is to be of benefit, I'm sure, to the Oireachtas Committee. I don't want to leave out the advocacy groups. They played an exceptionally important role in the process as well. I wish to extend my gratitude to all those groups who came before us to share their perspectives. This is also true of all of those individuals, representative groups and organisations who made submissions to the Assembly on the topic of the Eighth Amendment. As you know, there's a colossal volume of submissions, and they have provided us with a further impetus to our work on this process. Just to remember, 7 weeks ago, it's hard to believe it's 7 weeks ago, I want to say thanks to the women whose voices reverberated around this room as they recalled their own experiences of the Eighth Amendment. I want to once again repeat my heartfelt gratitude to them for their contribution. And I'm not forgetting the members. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have the members. And I know from the information I get from the Secretariat that many of you have made some very major sacrifices to be part of this process, and you have all given up your time and energy. Each weekend, and this weekend in particular, involved an incredible degree of concentration and evaluation. You were pushed and pulled, and you never flinched. It was September 2016 when most of you were initially approached to participate in the process, and it is very important now, towards the end of April 2017, that we recognise your continued dedication to the process. My cúpla focal are coming to an end, you'll be glad to hear. I just want to tell you briefly of the next steps. You have made your recommendations known through a rigorous voting process, and it is now up to me to fulfil the next step in the terms of reference, and that's to say that you do the final report. I will endeavour to finalise this report and furnish it to the Houses of the Oireachtas by late June. The Secretariat and I will communicate the contents of the report, and the date will be submitted to the Houses. The date it is to be submitted to the Houses will be, you will be informed of it in advance. Goramila Mahagav. And with that, I call our weekend to a close. Thank you very much.